He only meant to take a shortcut home. But when the single dad collapsed in the snow and heard two small voices whisper, "Sorry, Mom. We'll be good," he had no idea those words would lead him to a truth that would break and remake his heart forever. If stories of quiet courage, unexpected family, and the healing power of love speak to you, subscribe and stay with us. This is one you'll want to carry with you long after the last word. Now let us begin. The wind howled down from the Atlantic like it had a grudge. Flakes swirled in circles, wild and directionless, and the sky had long since lost its color. It was Christmas Eve in Shallow Creek, Maine, population 1,200 and dropping, and Hank Sullivan was limping home from his third shift in 36 hours. The road was slush, the light was gone, and his lungs burned with every step. A tattered manila envelope peeked out from the pocket of his worn canvas coat. The words, "Return to sender," were stamped in red like a wound across his name. He hadn't opened it yet. He didn't need to. He knew what it was. The envelope held the last donation he had sent to the children's shelter in Portland, the one he'd supported ever since Claire, the woman he had planned to marry, drowned in a ferry accident 2 winters ago. The shelter had closed, just like that. Quietly. No news story. No outrage. The check had come back with nothing but silence. Claire would have fought harder. Claire would have stood on someone's porch and refused to leave until they opened the door. But Hank kept his head down. He worked. He paid bills. He avoided mirrors. Tonight something inside him felt loose, unmoored. He cut through the park the way he always did, even in snow. It was a small patch of pine trees and benches, a footpath winding beside a frozen creek. He liked this place. It was where he used to sit with Claire and his guitar before the world fell apart. That's when he saw them. 2 small figures huddled together on a bench, barely visible under the snow. One upright. One slumped. A tangle of limbs wrapped in what looked like a too-thin hoodie and a backpack frayed at the edges. He squinted. Were they kids? He stepped closer, ignoring the creak in his knees and the pull in his chest. His boots crunched snow louder than he liked. The upright one turned a boy no more than 11 eyes, sharp and ancient for his age. He gripped something tight in one hand. His other arm was around the slumped form of a girl, maybe 7, face buried in his jacket. "Hey," Hank said hoarsely. "You okay?" The boy flinched, pulled the girl closer, didn't answer. Hank raised both hands. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." And then the pain hit. It started as a pinch in his ribs, a white-hot tightness that clawed its way upward. His vision blurred. The trees around him tilted. He dropped to one knee, then both. His breath came in gasps. Before everything went black, he heard it. A voice, small and trembling. "Sorry, Mom. We'll be good. Please don't go." It was the girl, whispering into the night. Then, nothing. When Hank opened his eyes again, the world smelled like wood smoke and wet wool. Something warm covered him, his own coat. A fire crackled. The ache in his chest was dull now, manageable. He blinked hard. His cabin. He was lying on his couch, snow melting in puddles on the floor. Across the room, the 2 children sat huddled beside the stove. The boy's hoodie was steaming gently as he tended to the girl's damp hair with Hank's old flannel shirt. She lay across a pile of folded blankets, still sleeping. The boy looked up. His eyes were wary, alert, but not afraid. "You're awake," he said. "How?" Hank's voice cracked. "How'd we get here? I dragged you," the boy said simply. "On the sled. From the park. You dragged me." Hank blinked. "All the way here, you fell in front of us. I didn't know what else to do." "Most kids would have run," Hank muttered. The boy shrugged. "Mom said, people help people." There it was again. That word. Mom. Hank sat up, slowly, head pounding. "Where is she?" The boy paused, his jaw set. "Gone," he said. "About 3 weeks now." Silence filled the cabin thick as the snow outside. "Name's Eli," the boy added finally. "She's Maya." Hank nodded, then looked over at the sleeping girl. She was curled into herself, clutching a faded canvas backpack like it was life itself. "You two alone, guess so," Eli said. "For now." Hank rubbed his face. Everything in him screamed to call someone child services, police, anyone. But something about the way the boy sat shoulders squared, like a man who'd already lost too much, kept him still. "I don't have much," Hank said quietly. "But the cabin's warm. You can stay here tonight." Eli looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. A log popped in the stove. Maya stirred, murmured something unintelligible. Eli leaned in, whispering in her ear. Hank watched them, a knot forming in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was something older, deeper. That night, as the children slept side by side on the floor, Hank sat in the rocker by the fire. He stared at his guitar leaning against the wall. Claire would have known what to do. Claire would have sung them something soft and brave. Hank reached out, fingers brushing the strings. He played a chord, then another. And somewhere in the stillness a child breathed easier. Hank awoke to a strange sensation, small, calloused fingers tucking a blanket over his chest. For a moment, he thought it was Claire, the way she used to do when he fell asleep on the couch after long gigs. But the air smelled different now. Wood smoke, pine, and something faintly sweet, like canned peaches. And the hand wasn't Claire's. It was smaller. Hesitant. "Sorry," the boy mumbled. "Didn't mean to wake you." Hank blinked into the morning light. Eli stood beside the couch wearing one of Hank's flannel shirts like a robe sleeves rolled 4 times over. The shirt swallowed him, but he stood tall. "I found it in the closet," he said, not quite apologizing. "It's fine," Hank said, voice groggy. "You cold?" Eli nodded once. "She's colder, though." He nodded toward the fire where Maya was still curled in the blankets, her small face barely visible under a knit cap. Hank swung his legs over the side of the couch, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. His entire body ached like he'd wrestled a bear, but he was alive. Somehow. "How long was I out?" "Half the night," Eli said. "Your lips were blue. I thought you might die." Hank chuckled softly, then winced. "Would have been a bad look, huh? Me dying after you dragged me home?" Eli shrugged again, but there was something behind his eyes. Relief, maybe. Or pride. Hank couldn't quite tell. He stood slowly and moved toward the stove. The embers were low. He added a couple logs and stoked the fire to life. Then he turned to the tiny kitchen and rummaged through the cupboards. 2 cans of soup, 1 box of instant oatmeal, some crackers. Not much, but enough. "You two eat yet?" Eli hesitated. "Not really." "Well," Hank said, "first rule of staying in this house, you don't skip breakfast." He handed Eli a can opener. "You good with this?" The boy nodded and got to work. Within minutes, the kitchen filled with the comforting scent of tomato soup. Hank poured it into chipped mugs, fancier bowls didn't exist in his place, and set them on the table. He knelt by Maya's side. Her face was pale with dark circles under her eyes. "Maya," he said gently. "Time to eat something." Her eyes fluttered open, bleary and confused. But then she saw her brother and relaxed. When Hank offered her the warm mug, she took it with both hands. "Thank you," she whispered. The voice was tiny but not broken. Just quiet. They ate in silence, the kind that doesn't feel awkward. Hank watched them closely. The way Eli tilted his mug to help Maya sip. The way Maya clutched the backpack even while eating. Something about that bag made Hank curious. After breakfast, Eli offered to help with dishes. Hank watched him carefully wash and dry each mug. He was methodical, neat, almost too careful for a boy his age. "Where were you heading?" Hank asked finally. Eli hesitated. "We were trying to find Shallow Creek." "You're in it," Hank said, surprised. "Why here?" Eli looked down, fiddling with the edge of the dish towel. "Mom said, before she died, she said if anything happened to find the man who played guitar in the square every Sunday morning." Hank's heart skipped. She said his music helped her stay alive back when things were really bad, that it gave her hope. He couldn't breathe for a moment. "That was me," Hank said softly. Eli nodded. "I figured. She had this picture. Not of your face, but your back. Guitar strap. Same shape, same strings." He motioned toward the corner where Hank's battered old Guild guitar rested against the wall. "Your mom," Hank began, then stopped. "She didn't make it." Eli shook his head. "Froze. In the van. Outside of town. 3 weeks ago. She told me to take Maya and run." "My God," Hank whispered. "Why didn't you tell someone?" "We tried," Eli said. "The first guy who found us said he'd call help. But then he took our food. Left us in a shed overnight. Said we were lucky he didn't call the cops." Hank closed his eyes. His chest burned, but not from pain this time. From shame. From rage. "I'm sorry, kid," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve that." Eli didn't respond. He didn't need to. That night, after a long day of quiet chores and cautious conversation, Maya curled up with a blanket beside the fire, drawing something on a crumpled piece of paper. Eli sat with her, humming softly. Hank pulled the guitar onto his lap. It felt heavier than usual. He plucked a few soft notes. The melody was old one Claire used to hum while brushing her hair. Maya looked up. "You play pretty," she said. "Thanks," Hank replied. She hesitated. "Mom said the man who played in the square was made of light." Hank's throat tightened. "Well," he said, strumming once more, "your mom must have been a very kind woman." "She was," Maya said. But she was tired at the end. The room went quiet again. Hank didn't fill it with words. He just played. For her. For them. For Claire. For Lucy. And somewhere in the music, something warm and alive began to rise. Not hope, not yet. But maybe the seed of it. The fire had burned low again, and outside the snow continued to fall in hushed cascades over the pines. The air inside the cabin held the quiet weight of survival, the kind that settled in only after the danger had passed. It was the kind of silence Hank hadn't felt in years. He sat in the worn armchair by the window, his guitar resting across his lap like a sleeping dog. The children were asleep on the rug, wrapped in blankets and soft breathing. Maya had drifted off, first her head on her brother's chest, one arm still curled protectively around her sketch pad. Eli hadn't lasted long either. His exhaustion finally winning the standoff with responsibility. Hank stared at them longer than he intended to. There was something fragile about the way they slept. Not like children who'd been tucked in, kissed goodnight, and promised tomorrow. More like animals in the wild light sleepers, always half aware, always bracing for cold, or hunger, or danger. He strummed a quiet chord, muting it almost instantly with his palm. The sound barely rose above the crackle of the fire. Claire used to say he played like a man telling secrets to the strings. Now he wasn't even sure what he had left to whisper. He hadn't written a new song since the funeral, not even a fragment. But as his fingers moved, the old melodies returned, familiar ones he hadn't touched in years. Bits of folk songs and lullabies, patches of tune stitched together from memory. The music didn't soar, it didn't weep, it just held space. And then softly, "You're him." Hank looked up. Eli was watching him through barely opened eyes, voice thick with sleep. The man from the square. Hank swallowed. "Guess I am. Mom used to sit on the stone wall and close her eyes when you played," Eli said. "Sometimes she'd cry, but she said it was the good kind. like letting something go. Hank's throat tightened. He hadn't known. All those mornings in the square, just playing to keep himself sane, to keep Claire close. He never imagined someone else had been listening that deeply. She was strong, Eli said suddenly, before she got sick, before we lost the apartment. She tried to keep it all going, even when people stopped helping. She did more than most ever could, Hank said, setting the guitar down gently. She raised 2 good kids. Eli looked away. Sometimes I wasn't good. You're 11, Hank said. You're not supposed to be perfect. You're supposed to be safe, fed, loved. That's not on you. Eli didn't respond right away. He stared into the fire like he wanted to believe the words, but couldn't quite get there. After a moment, he said, "She told me if anything happened to take Maya here. She said someone would know what to do. She meant me." Eli nodded. "She didn't know your name. Just the man with the guitar who plays like he means it." Hank almost laughed, almost cried. That's a big job to give a guy who doesn't even know what day it is. "She trusted you," Eli said, matter of fact. Hank looked at him, this boy who had carried his little sister across miles of cold highway, who had pulled a grown man through snow on a broken sled, who was barely old enough to shave. "You can't stay here," Hank said gently. "Not forever." "I'm not," he stopped. "I'm not the guy people send kids to." Eli's jaw tightened. "We don't want your money or your food. We just don't want to go back. Back where anywhere with white walls and clipboards." Hank understood that too well. Foster homes, institutions, cold places run by tired people. "I'm not a guardian," he said. "I've never even filled out the forms. We'll help," Eli said. Hank blinked. "You're 11. Then teach me." It wasn't pleading. It wasn't begging. It was just a boy laying down a choice. And it was Hank who couldn't look away. The next morning, the sky broke open with a reluctant sun. Snow glittered on the cabin roof and across the frozen creek, but inside the world felt warmer. Hank let the kids sleep in, while he made pancakes, bad ones, but hot and golden enough to pass for decent. Maya beamed when she saw the steam rising from her plate. Eli offered a rare smile, though he drowned his in syrup like it owed him money. After breakfast, Hank drove them into town. "We're going to meet someone," he told them. They passed shuttered shops and crooked mailboxes, the same streets Hank had driven 100 times without really seeing. But now every corner looked different, more vivid, more alive. He pulled into the gravel lot outside a modest brick building with a faded sign, Shallow Creek Community Outreach Center. Inside the place was warm, humming with quiet energy. Bulletin boards crowded with flyers, a receptionist with reading glasses on her forehead and a pen behind her ear. "We're here to see Rachel Brooks," Hank said. The receptionist looked up. "She's in her office. You can go in." He knocked lightly on a wooden door, then opened it. Rachel looked up from a stack of paperwork. Her auburn hair was clipped back in a no-nonsense bun, and her eyes were sharp as ever. For a moment, recognition danced behind her expression, but she masked it well. "Hank Sullivan," she said, standing. "Well, I'll be. It's been, 10 years?" "Just about," he said. "You're running this place now, director, since March," she said. "How can I help?" Hank turned, slightly revealing Eli and Maya, standing just behind him. Rachel's eyes softened. "I think," Hank said quietly, "I need your help figuring out how to keep them safe." Rachel's gaze moved between him and the children. She walked around the desk, knelt to Maya's eye level and said, "Hi, sweetheart." "I'm Rachel." Maya nodded. Then Rachel stood up, turned to Hank and said the words that would shift everything. "Let's sit down, and let's figure it out together." Rachel Brooks hadn't expected to see him again, least of all like this. She stared across her office desk, trying to reconcile the quiet man seated before her with the guitar-playing dreamer she once knew. Time had sanded down his edges. His hair was longer, his face more angular, sun-worn, but the eyes were still there, earnest, a little sad, and filled with something heavier than he let on. The children beside him didn't fidget. The boy sat upright, protective. The girl leaned into his arm, eyes wide, taking everything in without a word. "You want to explain what's going on?" Rachel asked, keeping her voice steady but gentle. Hank exhaled. "I found them in the park, Christmas Eve, huddled on a bench, freezing. The little one, Maya, was nearly unconscious. I passed out from exhaustion right there. They dragged me back to my cabin." Rachel blinked. "They saved you?" "Yeah," he said. "Then I woke up to find they didn't have anywhere else to go." He paused. "Their mother passed about 3 weeks ago, in a van off Route 9. The boy Eli says she told him to find the man with the guitar. Apparently she used to listen to me play in the square." Rachel looked at the children again this time, with a weight in her chest she hadn't felt in a long while. "I remember her," she said softly. "Lucy Carson. She used to come in for food vouchers." Eli stiffened. "We didn't take handouts." Rachel turned to him, not unkindly. "No shame in surviving, Eli. Your mom was one of the bravest people I ever met." His shoulders relaxed slightly. So she said, folding her hands, "What's the plan now?" "That's why I'm here," Hank said. "I don't have any legal right to keep them. I figured you'd know what to do." Rachel leaned back in her chair. Her instincts kicked in automatically: intake protocols, emergency placements, social worker calls. But then she looked into Maya's face and saw something deeper. Hope, but the kind of hope that had been disappointed before. Rachel stood, walked over to a cabinet, and pulled out 2 small clipboards. "We'll start with a temporary intake," she said, "just to buy some time." "No promises, Hank. This stuff gets complicated fast." "I'm not expecting miracles," he said. "Well, that's good," she muttered, "because miracles tend to get tangled in red tape." Eli followed every word with the eyes of someone who'd stopped trusting adults. But he took the form when Rachel handed it to him and began carefully printing in block letters. Rachel knelt beside Maya again. "Can you write your name, sweetheart?" Maya nodded slowly and took the pencil. As they worked, Rachel observed Hank. The way he leaned forward slightly, like he wanted to hover, but was trying to respect their space. The way he tapped his fingers on his knee, nervous energy, she remembered. He used to do that backstage before every open mic. "I haven't played since Claire passed," he said quietly when she walked him out to the front desk later. "Not really." Rachel nodded. "I'm sorry. I heard about her. That was a long winter for everyone." He glanced down. "I tried to send donations to a shelter Claire supported. The check came back last week. Returned to sender. I don't know. Maybe I was looking for something to give that made sense. And then the kids showed up," she said. "Right." They stood in silence for a moment. "You're still playing, though," she said. "Just for them," he answered. Rachel watched him a little longer. "So what happens if the state decides to relocate them?" "I don't know," Hank admitted. "But I know I can't send them away without a fight." Rachel didn't respond at first. She simply nodded and returned to her office. That night, Rachel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The storm had passed, but her thoughts churned harder than any snowdrift. She couldn't shake the image of Maya's hands, small, ink-smudged, gripping the pencil like it was a lifeline. Or the haunted steadiness in Eli's eyes. They'd been through more than most adults. She knew the process. The state would want the children placed quickly, ideally in a foster home, with a 2-parent household and a certified history. Hank would be at a disadvantage on every front: single, modest income, no prior experience, no blood tie. But something in her resisted the idea of pushing them apart. It wasn't protocol, it was instinct. It was the way Maya looked at Hank, like he was safety wrapped in denim and warmth. It was the way Eli checked on him not out of fear, but trust. Rachel had learned the hard way to be skeptical of feelings. Years ago, her decision to keep siblings together against the court's advice had cost her a case and a career she'd built from nothing. But this didn't feel like a gamble. It felt like a second chance. For all of them. She reached toward the nightstand, picked up her phone, and opened an old photo album. One from back when she used to sing on Friday nights at the Rusted Lantern. Hank was in one of the pictures, head down, fingers on the frets, the outline of Claire standing in the wings. Rachel remembered that version of herself, the girl who believed music could fix broken hearts. Maybe it still could. Maybe it just looked different now. Back at the cabin, Hank sat beside the fireplace, the kids asleep behind him. He thumbed the edge of his guitar but didn't play. Not tonight. Instead, he pulled a blanket tighter around Maya's shoulder and tucked Eli's arm back beneath the quilt. People help people, he whispered to the dark. Guess I forgot that for a while. He stared into the dying fire until the embers flickered down to nothing. And in that fading glow, something stirred. Not music, not hope, not yet, but the faintest echo of purpose. 3 days after the snowstorm, the town thawed in patches, like wounds reluctantly healing. Shallow Creek's sidewalks re-emerged, crusted with salt, and the bell above the outreach center's front door resumed its chime each time a neighbor stepped in, needing food vouchers, heating aid, or just someone to listen. Rachel was at her desk when the email arrived. Subject: Lucy Carson. Child welfare case transfer. Urgent. She opened it with a sinking feeling. It was from a county officer in Bangor, informing her that a private petition had been filed by Greta Lansing, a registered foster applicant with full credentials, requesting immediate guardianship review for Eli and Maya Carson. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Greta Lansing. The name rang familiar, not because of scandal, but because of praise. Greta was a philanthropist from the coast. Widowed. No biological children. Her estate hosted equine therapy programs, art recovery classes, and second-chance retreats for youth in foster care. On paper, she was a saint, and she wanted the kids. Later that day, Hank arrived at the center with the children. Maya clutched her sketchbook. Eli held a grocery bag with their few clothes. Hank looked tired, but more alert than Rachel had seen him, like a man living on instinct. "We've got a problem," she said the moment he stepped into her office. She didn't sugarcoat it. Hank wasn't the type who needed gentle buffering. She showed him the petition. "Who is she?" he asked. "Greta Lansing. Wealthy. Experienced. Lives an hour east right on the coast. No children, but she's passed every background check licensed and has a team of lawyers." Hank read the email again, slower this time. Maya had crawled into the office armchair and was sketching a barn with horses. Eli stood behind her like a sentinel. "They don't even know her," Hank muttered. "They will if the court sides with her. She's just shopping for kids." Rachel flinched, not because he was wrong, but because she'd once felt the same way about some cases, and said nothing. "She's done real work, Hank," she said carefully. Her homes hosted dozens of foster kids. A lot of them thrived. "And how many got kept?" he asked, eyes darkening. How many got stayed with loved for more than just a therapy brochure? Rachel didn't answer. That night, Hank sat outside the cabin beneath a pale moon, strumming softly while the kids slept inside. He didn't want to be angry, but he was. Not at Greta Lansing necessarily, but at the system. At the neatness of paper trails that ignored real moments, Maya falling asleep against his shoulder, Eli handing him tools in the garage without being asked, the way the cabin had started to sound like life again. The court wouldn't see that. They'd see a single man, moderate income, no legal connection to the children. The next morning, Rachel called with a plan, "We file for emergency foster certification," she said. "I'll help you get your background checks, home inspection references. You'll still have to appear in court." "Do I stand a chance?" he asked. She hesitated. "Legally. Barely. But emotionally, you're already their home." The following week became a flurry of paperwork classes and whispered prayers. Hank attended a CPR course in town, memorized child nutrition guidelines, cleaned every corner of the cabin with a vigor that surprised even himself. Rachel helped draft his personal statement and coordinated letters of support from townsfolk who remembered Hank's quiet charity, remembered how he showed up for people even when no one asked. On the third night, Maya stood by the stove as Hank stirred tomato soup. She tugged on his sleeve. "Is the court going to take us away?" Hank crouched down, looked her in the eyes. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But I'm trying really hard to make sure that doesn't happen." She nodded solemnly, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded paper. "It's for you," she said. "I drew it last night." The picture showed 4 stick figures holding hands in front of a cabin. One tall man with a guitar on his back, a woman with glasses, 2 children smiling. "She's Rachel Maya," said, pointing. "I added her because she helps." Hank's throat tightened. He didn't speak. Sometimes a picture did more than words ever could. 2 days before the hearing, Rachel knocked on the cabin door unannounced. She held a manila folder and looked wind-blown cheeks flushed from the cold. "Greta Lansing sent a personal statement to the court," she said, handing him the folder. Hank opened it and read. It was eloquent, gracious. She'd spoken of the deep longing to nurture and her belief that children deserve not just care, but enrichment art, nature language, peace. He couldn't argue with that. Rachel studied him. She's not a bad person. No, Hank agreed, but she's not their person. Rachel looked down at the floorboards. "You're going to need to say that, exactly like that." The night before the hearing, the children couldn't sleep. Neither could Hank. They ended up on the couch together, Eli on one side, Maya curled up between them, wrapped in one of Claire's old shawls. Hank held them both as best he could. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. But when Maya whispered, "Please don't let them take us," he simply said, "I'll be right there with you. Every second." And he meant it. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and old heating ducts. It wasn't grand, no marble columns, no high drama, just wood-paneled walls, a weary flag in the corner, and a single row of pew-like benches for spectators. But to Hank Sullivan, it might as well have been the center of the world. He sat at the defendant's table, hands folded tight. His thrift store blazer felt stiff across the shoulders. Rachel sat beside him, a tidy folder of documents at her side. Across the aisle, Greta Lansing adjusted the collar of her pale blue coat, her expression composed, but not cold. Maya and Eli waited in a private room with a child advocate. Rachel had insisted on it. No child should sit through the weighing of their own worth, she'd said. Judge Walter Keene entered, a tall man in his 60s, with a stern jaw softened by grief lines. He had lost his wife last spring, and the whole county still brought him casseroles. He was known for being fair, but not sentimental. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the docket, and began. Case of temporary guardianship for Eli and Maya Carson, filed under emergency motion by Mr. Hank Sullivan, and counter-petitioned for full adoption review by Ms. Greta Lansing. He looked up, eyes scanning the room. "Let's proceed." Greta's lawyer went first. She was polished, efficient, and deeply familiar with the kind of language courts like to hear. "Your Honor, Ms. Lansing offers not only a stable and loving home, but a history of restorative foster care success. Her estate offers private tutoring, equine therapy, creative expression, workshops, everything a child could need to heal and flourish. She seeks legal guardianship with full intent to adopt. She turned to Hank's side of the room. While we do not question Mr. Sullivan's heart, we must note he is a single man with no prior parenting experience, no legal or blood connection to the children, and limited financial capacity. His housing situation, while adequate, lacks backup stability. This is not about affection. It's about sustainability. Rachel's fingers curled slightly, but she said nothing. Judge Keene scribbled a few notes, then motioned for Rachel. She stood slowly, her voice calm but sure. Your Honor, I've worked in family services for nearly 15 years. I've seen children thrive in mansions and crumble in duplexes, and I've seen the opposite just as often. What we're talking about here isn't just who has the better resume. We're talking about connection. She gestured to Hank. These children sought out Mr. Sullivan not by accident, but because their mother, Lucy Carson, left them with instructions to find him. Not by name, but by memory. She remembered his music, his presence, and his spirit. The children found him, and in every way that matters, they've chosen him. Greta's lawyer rose again. Intentions aren't legally binding. Rachel turned. Neither is love. But it's real. Then the judge looked at Hank. Mr. Sullivan, he said, voice low but clear. Do you wish to speak? Hank stood. His knees felt shaky, but his voice didn't tremble. I didn't ask for any of this, he began. I was just walking home. I'd had a long day, one of too many, and I was tired in that kind of way, where you don't even know what you're carrying anymore. He paused, eyes locking on the judge. Then I saw two kids on a bench, freezing, scared. The girl was whispering to her mom who'd already died, and I realized right then that if I walked away, I wouldn't just be letting them down. I'd be letting down the man I used to be, the one Claire believed in. He drew a breath. They aren't mine by blood, but they're mine in every way that matters. I've watched Eli guard his sister like a soldier. I've seen Maya's whole face light up over a grilled cheese sandwich. They've folded their lives around mine without even asking. And I don't know what else you'd call family, if not that. The room was still. Even Greta looked down at her lap. After a brief recess, the judge returned, his expression unreadable. I have reviewed all documents, he began, and I have no doubts as to Ms. Lansing's qualifications. You are a remarkable woman, and I thank you for what you've done for so many. He turned to Hank. But these children didn't ask for a resume. They asked for a home, a familiar voice, a place where they wouldn't have to start over again. He tapped his pen twice on the desk. Therefore, I am granting temporary guardianship to Mr. Sullivan, with oversight from Ms. Brooks as supervising case officer. Full review in 6 months pending routine check-ins. Ms. Lansing's offer for educational support will remain in place at her discretion. Greta stood slowly. Her eyes met Hank's. I meant what I wrote, she said softly. If you ever need help, please ask. Hank nodded. Thank you. It wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't a movie ending. But it was enough. Outside the courthouse, Maya ran into Hank's arms, nearly knocking him off balance. Eli stood behind her, blinking hard. Did we win? Maya asked. Hank crouched down. We didn't win anything, sweetie, but we get to stay together. And that's enough. Eli didn't speak. He just stepped forward and hugged Hank around the waist. Rachel watched from a few steps away. She had seen hundreds of families pass through these doors, dozens of reunifications, countless goodbyes. But this was different. It felt like something real had been planted. Something that might grow slowly without ceremony, but grow all the same. The fever came quietly. At first it was just a flush in Maya's cheeks, then a cough that sounded dry and shallow. By morning she could barely keep her eyes open, her small body curled beneath layers of blankets on the couch. Her skin was warm, too warm, and her voice when she spoke had shrunk to a whisper. "She's okay, right?" Eli asked, trying not to look panicked. Hank pressed a cool cloth to Maya's forehead, heart pounding. Could just be the flu, he said, though it didn't sound convincing even to him. Rachel's on her way. He didn't add what he was really thinking, that the county still held sway, that a sick child under his care could become one more strike against him, that every mistake mattered now. Eli hovered by the stove, pacing in a short loop that was too controlled for a child. It broke Hank's heart to see a boy so young already learning the dance of worry. Maya stirred. "Can I have my backpack?" Hank glanced toward the hook by the door, where she always kept it. He handed it over gently, and Maya clutched it to her chest like it was stitched from memories. "Mom's in here," she mumbled, curling back into sleep. Hank swallowed hard. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later with a stethoscope, a thermometer, and a plastic bag filled with over-the-counter medicine. "She needs fluids rest and close monitoring," she said, after checking Maya's breathing. "You did the right thing calling me." "She asked for her mom," Hank said quietly. "Said she was in the bag." Rachel blinked. "The backpack." He nodded. When Maya drifted off again, they unzipped it together. Inside was a rolled cloth bundle frayed at the edges and wrapped with a hair tie. Rachel opened it slowly, careful not to disturb the soft graphite dust clinging to the folds. It was a sketchbook, homemade, the pages bound with yarn. Dozens of them. Charcoal and pencil mostly, but some had been washed with faint watercolors. The drawings were meticulous and delicate, full of movement and emotion. Rachel turned each page with reverence. A watercolor of a bus stop under golden leaves. A charcoal rendering of Eli's face as a toddler mouth open in awe. A pair of hands holding a cracked coffee mug. Then on page 34, there it was. A figure sketched in shadow sitting on a low wall with a guitar in his lap. His back was to the viewer. The strap stretched diagonally across his shoulders. The sunlight fell behind him, haloing his outline. No face, just presence. It was unmistakable. Claire had taken a photo just like it years ago. Hank recognized the posture, the way his left leg always lifted slightly when he played. The caption written in Lucy's neat handwriting below the sketch read, "He doesn't know it, but he plays like he's keeping the world stitched together." Rachel's breath caught. There were more. Sketches of the square of Hank's hands on the strings of Claire watching him from the bench. In the margins, tiny notes in Lucy's handwriting, music when I had no voice. That song, Redbird. It's why I stayed upright that day. If anything happens, take them to the music. Rachel gently closed the sketchbook and passed it to Hank, who took it as if it were holy. Later that night, after Maya had fallen into a lighter sleep, Hank sat alone on the porch steps. The sketchbook rested on his lap. He turned to that same page over and over, staring at the faceless man who looked so much like the stranger he once was. Rachel joined him, a thermos of tea in her hand. She passed it to him wordlessly. He drank, then asked, "Why didn't she ever say anything?" Rachel shrugged. "Maybe she didn't think you'd remember her. Or maybe you were already giving her everything she needed." Hank nodded slowly. "I was just playing to stay sane. Claire had just started chemo. I didn't know what else to do. And she found something in it. So did the kids. I keep thinking, what if I hadn't walked that way home?" Rachel leaned back, her shoulder brushing his. "Then some other man would have found them," she said. "But they wouldn't have known what to do with music and quiet and grief." He looked at her. "Do you think I'm enough?" She hesitated, then smiled gently. "I think you're the one they came looking for. That has to count for something." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind only old friends or broken hearts could share. Then Hank asked, "Did you ever think we'd end up back here?" Rachel chuckled. "You mean, Middle-aged and exhausted? Yeah, he said. But maybe also building something worth staying for. She didn't answer with words, but the way she leaned into his side said enough. Inside, Maya stirred. Her fever had broken. Her cheeks were damp with sweat, but her eyes were clearer now. Eli rushed to her side, relief softening his features. I had a dream, Maya whispered. What was it? Hank asked. You were playing guitar in the park, she said. Mom was sitting beside you and she told me it was okay now, that we found the right man. Hank felt something shift inside him. Not pain, not even joy. Just clarity. The knock came mid-morning, soft but deliberate. Hank wiped his hands on a dish towel and glanced toward the door. The kids were in the back room playing with Rachel's donated puzzle, set their laughter faint but steady. Maya's fever had subsided the night before, and for the first time in days, the cabin felt whole. The knock came again. He opened the door to find Greta Lansing standing on the porch. She wore a wool peacoat and leather gloves, her silver blonde hair tucked into a neat braid. Behind her stood a sleek black car idling at the edge of the snowy driveway, the driver staying respectfully inside. Mr. Sullivan, she said, with a warm, if slightly formal smile. I hope I'm not intruding. Hank blinked. You're not, I guess. Come in. She stepped into the cabin, her eyes sweeping across the space like she was cataloging every detail. Wood-burning stove, children's boots by the wall, a guitar resting in the corner beside Maya's drawings. He offered her tea and she accepted. They sat at the table, steam curling between them. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Greta set her cup down. I wanted to see it for myself, where they've been. Hank nodded. They're in the back. I didn't tell them you were coming. That's fine, she said gently. This visit isn't official. He raised an eyebrow. No attorneys this time. She smiled. No, just me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table. I've withdrawn the adoption petition, she said. Hank stared at it, unsure whether to feel relieved or suspicious. Why, he asked quietly. I meant what I said in court, Greta replied. I cared deeply for children like Eli and Maya. I've spent the better part of a decade trying to give them peace. But when I saw them with you, I realized I was offering something they didn't need. She looked down at her gloves, twisting them slowly in her hands. I'm used to filling spaces, she continued. Empty rooms, empty beds, empty chapters in my own life. But your home isn't empty. It's alive. Hank exhaled. The weight in his chest, the one he hadn't acknowledged since the hearing, began to lift. Thank you, he said. Greta nodded, then pulled a second envelope from her bag. This is for Rachel. It's a check enough to fund a community arts program for the next 2 years. I want Maya to have a place to paint. And Eli, if he ever wants to draw sculpt hammer nails into driftwood, I want him to have the freedom to find his own way. Hank stared at her. You don't owe us anything, I know, she said. That's what makes it real. Maya peeked her head into the kitchen, barefoot and curious. When she saw Greta, she stopped short. Greta offered a soft smile. Hello, Maya. Maya stepped out cautiously. You're the lady from the court. That's right, Greta said. But today, I'm just visiting. Maya glanced at Hank, who nodded gently. The girl padded over to the table and held something out to Greta, a folded piece of paper. I drew this yesterday, she said. Greta unfolded it. It was a picture of the cabin's smoke curling from the chimney pine trees wrapped in snow, and 4 stick figures standing in front. Maya, Eli, Hank, and a woman with glasses and red hair. She's Miss Rachel, Maya explained, because she's always here. Greta's eyes shimmered. It's beautiful. Thank you. Maya smiled, then returned to the back room. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Rachel arrived later that afternoon. She spotted Greta's car first and entered the cabin with caution. But the moment she stepped inside and saw Greta and Hank seated side by side at the table, tea in hand, calm between them, she relaxed. Greta rose to greet her. "I came to deliver this," she said, offering the envelope. "It's for your programs, if you're willing." Rachel opened the envelope, then blinked. "This is more than generous," Greta nodded. "Consider it an investment in keeping families together where they already exist." Rachel studied her for a long moment. "You know you could have walked away bitter." Greta smiled softly. "I didn't lose. I just realized the story wasn't mine to finish." She picked up her coat. "Goodbye, Mr. Sullivan," she said, offering her hand. Greta Hank said, shaking it firmly. "You're welcome here anytime. And Ms. Brooks," Greta added, turning to Rachel, "thank you for holding the line." Rachel nodded, her voice warm. "It's not a line, it's a bridge." As the car disappeared down the snow-covered road, Rachel and Hank stepped outside. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky burned orange behind the trees. "You think she really meant all that Hank asked?" Rachel tucked her hands into her pockets. "I do. People change. Sometimes it just takes the right moment." They stood in silence, watching the sky shift. "Thank you," he said, "for believing in this." Rachel looked at him. "I wasn't just believing in them, Hank." He turned to her. "I was believing in you," she finished. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. And in that space where pride had softened, where grief had found its voice, and where the children inside laughed like music, they understood that family wasn't a matter of paperwork or blood. It was a decision, made, remade, and made again. The courthouse was quieter than Hank remembered. No protesters, no reporters, no weighty anticipation. Just a Tuesday morning in late January, the kind where the world seemed to breathe out steam and wait for spring. But inside the small chamber, where Judge Walter Keene sat behind the bench, the air felt charged. Hank smoothed the front of his corduroy jacket, a recent thrift store find Rachel approved, and sat at the familiar table. He hadn't brought a speech, no carefully rehearsed argument. He had already said everything worth saying in front of this man. What remained now was truth and trust. Rachel sat beside him, a quiet calm radiating from her presence. She had reviewed every paper, every form, every step in the process. He was as prepared as anyone could be. Across the aisle sat no one. Greta Lansing had formally withdrawn her petition and declined to attend. She'd sent a note instead, handwritten, no legalese, stating, "They are already home. I have no wish to disturb what's been built." It was the first time Hank had cried in front of Rachel. Eli and Maya weren't present. Rachel had insisted they stay home, promising to bring them back chocolate muffins from the diner as a post-verdict celebration or consolation. "No matter what happens," she'd said, "they'll wake up in your house. That's what matters." Still, Hank felt them in the room, the weight of their trust, the echo of their laughter, the 1,000 quiet moments that had woven them into the fabric of his days. Judge Keene cleared his throat. "I've reviewed all documents submitted by Mr. Sullivan and Ms. Brooks." He began, his voice steady, but not unfeeling. "In addition to compliance with all procedural requirements, I have received letters from over a dozen members of this community. Neighbors, shop owners, teachers, all attesting to the presence, compassion, and transformation witnessed at Mr. Sullivan's home." He paused. "Mr. Sullivan, when this case began, you had no legal standing, no experience. By conventional standards, you were not the ideal candidate." Hank held his breath. "But family," the judge continued, "is rarely conventional. It is forged in the small daily acts of presence, the willingness to stay, the humility to learn, the courage to begin again." He looked directly at Hank. And in that regard, you have exceeded expectation." Rachel's fingers tightened around Hank's. "Therefore, Judge Keene said it is the ruling of this court that legal guardianship of Eli and Maya Carson be granted to Mr. Hank Sullivan, with full rights and responsibilities therein. This ruling is effective immediately." He tapped his gavel once. The sound rang not like a crack, but like a quiet beginning. Outside, the wind had picked up. Hank stepped down the courthouse stairs into the sun with Rachel at his side. "You okay?" she asked. He let out a slow breath, something between relief and disbelief. "I don't know," he admitted. "I think I need to sit still long enough to let it catch up." Rachel smiled. "Well, let's go tell the kids before they start thinking we traded them for muffins." At the cabin, Maya and Eli were waiting at the kitchen table, muffin wrappers already scattered like confetti. Maya looked up, first her expression open and hopeful. Eli stood beside her, arms crossed, trying to look unaffected, but Hank could see the nerves under the surface. Rachel gave a small nod. "It's official," Hank said. "You're stuck with me." For a second, no one moved. Then Maya leapt from her chair, launched herself into Hank's arms, and squealed so loudly the windows could have cracked. Eli didn't cry, but his eyes shone as he came forward and wrapped his arms around them both. Rachel stood near the doorway, tears prickling her eyes. "You're good at this," she whispered later as they sat on the porch. "The dad thing." "I'm winging it," Hank said. "All the best ones do." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came only after long trials and quiet victories. Hank reached into the side table drawer and pulled out Lucy's sketchbook. "Still can't stop looking at this," he said. Rachel flipped through it slowly, then paused on a blank page near the back. "Have you added anything?" she asked. "No. Maybe you should." Hank thought for a moment, then took a pencil from the coffee can they used to hold art supplies. In the margin just under the drawing of the cabin, he wrote, "This is where we stayed." Not because we had to, but because we chose to. That night after dinner, Hank brought out his guitar. "Will you play the one Mom used to like?" Maya asked. He nodded. "Red Bird." "Yeah," she said. "The flying one." He strummed the first chord, and the music filled the room, like light spilling through the cracks. Eli tapped his foot in rhythm. Maya hummed softly. Rachel, seated beside the window, closed her eyes and smiled. It wasn't a concert. It wasn't perfect. But it was home. And this time, it wasn't something Hank was trying to get back to. It was something he'd built note by note, day by day. By the time the thaw came to Shallow Creek, the snow had melted not just from rooftops and roads, but from something deeper inside the cabin on Willow Lane. Gone were the icy drafts through the floorboards, the cold silences that used to hover between strangers. In their place, a home warmed not just by fire, but by rhythm of laughter, shared meals, slow Saturday mornings, and bedtime stories told in alternating voices. Spring had slipped in quietly like a houseguest, too polite to knock. Maya planted wildflowers beside the steps, kneeling with careful hands and muddy knees. She gave each one a name: Hope, Claire, Lucy, and Redbird. Eli kept a notebook now, where he recorded everything they fixed: screen doors, loose boards, the wiring on the back porch light. He called it the Book of Things That Stayed Fixed. Hank found himself waking earlier these days, not from restlessness, but readiness. He made breakfast before the kids came downstairs. He tuned his guitar not out of habit, but because Maya asked for songs by name. They had, without fanfare, become a family. One Friday afternoon, Rachel stopped by after work. She came through the back door, like she always did now, arms full groceries in one, a box of art supplies in the other. "I found a set of oil pastels at the community center. Figured Maya might graduate from crayons soon." Pastels. Rhea peeked her head around the corner, her eyes bright. Like real ones, Rachel grinned. the smudgy, glorious kind. Maya whooped and ran off to clear space on the table. Hank took the groceries from Rachel's arm. "You're making a habit of spoiling us." "Not spoiling," she said, brushing snowmelt from her sleeve. "Just investing in the things that matter." He looked at her, the words lingering between them longer than he expected. After dinner, homemade pizza, the crust lopsided, but perfect. Hank stepped onto the porch with his guitar. The breeze carried the scent of pine and new grass. The sky had turned watercolor blue, and fireflies were just beginning to blink in the field. Rachel followed, mugs of tea in her hands. She sat beside him on the step, tucking her knees in close. "You haven't played out here in a while," she said. "I used to," Hank replied, "when it felt like music was the only thing left." She glanced sideways. "And now it feels like there's more to lose, which strangely makes the playing sweeter." He ran his fingers along the strings, not strumming, yet just feeling them vibrate beneath his skin. "You know," he said, "Claire and I never made it this far. She got sick before we could build anything real. We were always planning for someday. And then, someday stopped." Rachel said nothing, just placed a hand on his knee. "I guess I was afraid," Hank continued, "that building something again would dishonor her, like I was trading her memory for something new." Rachel's voice was soft. "But maybe it's not a trade. Maybe it's a continuation." He looked at her. The porch light caught her face just enough to make him remember who she had always been, a woman who never ran from the hard conversations. She met his eyes. "We both lost people, Hank. You to the water. Me to a courtroom. And we both found our way back here. That's not an accident." He strummed a chord. Then another. The music came back like muscle memory, fluid and gentle. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her. Inside, Maya drew a new picture under the lamplight of 2 grown-ups and 2 kids sitting beneath a starlit sky. Sunday morning, Hank took the kids into town. The farmer's market had reopened for the season, and the town square was filled with music, kettle corn, and hand-stitched quilts, billowing in the breeze. Maya ran ahead to the flower stall. Eli trailed behind his hands, deep in his hoodie pockets. Hank stood in front of the makeshift stage, a modest platform with folding chairs and a couple unplugged amps. "Go on," Rachel said, appearing beside him. He turned to her. "Go on." She nodded toward the stage. "Your regular spot. You think we forgot?" He hesitated. "I haven't played in public since before Claire," he trailed off. Rachel reached into her tote and pulled out the old photo Lucy had drawn, the back of a man seated on a bench, guitar in hand, sunlight haloing his silhouette. "It's not about starting over," she said. "It's about continuing the song." Hank looked toward the stage, then toward Maya, who had spotted them and was waving a fistful of tulips. He stepped up without thinking. The old bench was gone, replaced by new planks, but the feeling returned the moment he sat. The guitar settled into his hands like it had been waiting. He played Redbird. People stopped, listened. A few remembered, but most didn't know the story. They didn't need to. The sound said enough. Eli leaned against a tree, arms crossed, but eyes locked on Hank's hands. Maya swayed gently with the tulips. Rachel stood a few steps back, smiling in that quiet, proud way that said, "You came back." And Hank played not for applause, not for legacy, but because it felt right. Because the music, like the family they were building, had found its way home. It was nearly summer when the cabin turned 1 year older, not by calendar, but by memory. Maya marked the date with blue chalk on the porch railing. "This is the day we became a family." Eli didn't argue. He just nodded and asked if they could make pancakes for dinner. The wildflowers Maya had planted in the spring were blooming now, tall and stubborn, dancing with bees. A wooden sign that read, "Home at Last," hung above the porch steps, painted by Rachel, lettered by Eli, sealed with Maya's tiny handprint in the corner. Hank stood at the kitchen window that morning, mug of coffee and hand guitar slung across his shoulder. The house buzzed with life. Rachel humming in the background, the kids setting the table, something baking in the oven that smelled suspiciously like peach cobbler. He never thought peace would sound like this. After breakfast, Maya brought him her latest drawing, a simple image. 4 chairs around a fire pit, the stars above shaped like musical notes. "You think stars listen to music?" she asked. Hank smiled. "I think they probably hum along." She giggled, satisfied. He tapped the corner of the paper. "You know what I see in this? What a family." She nodded solemnly. "That's why I draw it over and over, so I don't forget what it looks like." He knelt beside her. "You don't have to remember it from paper anymore, sweetie. You're living in it now." That evening, Rachel and Hank took the kids down to Shallow Creek Lake for a picnic. The sun hung low, brushing the water with gold. A gentle wind stirred the reeds, and ducks drifted lazily across the shallows. They spread out a blanket near the edge. Eli skipped stones, while Maya braided Rachel's hair with wild clover. Hank watched them all from a few steps back, the guitar resting beside him on the grass. "You know," Rachel said, twisting a final braid into place, "this feels like the life I used to defend in court, but never really believed in." Hank turned to her. "And now I believe in it," she said, "because I've seen it built from the dust." He didn't reply right away, just reached over, gently took her hand. They sat that way for a long time, no need for noise or stories or songs, just stillness, just presence. That night, Maya asked if she could stay up a little later. She had something to show Hank. She opened Lucy's sketchbook, now worn at the edges, pages dog-eared with use. "I added something," she said shyly. At the very back on the final page was a new drawing. It was them. All of them. Sitting on the porch under the string lights. Hank with his guitar. Rachel holding a mug. Eli and Maya leaning together on the step. But what made him freeze was the 5th figure. In the background, standing slightly behind the porch, beam drawn in soft grays and white pencil, was a woman. Hair loose, smile, kind one hand resting on the porch rail. "She's not a ghost," Maya whispered. "She's watching. That's what I see when I dream." Hank stared at the drawing, throat tight. "I think she's proud," Maya said. "Of all of us." He pulled her into a hug, holding her longer than usual. "Me too," he whispered. Later, after the kids were in bed, Rachel joined him on the porch. "I saw the drawing," she said softly. "Me too," Hank replied. "Claire and Lucy. They're still here. Not like we used to think. But they are." Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think the past comes with us if we carry it gently." They sat in the hush of the evening, the stars bright above the woods murmuring just beyond the porch. And then Rachel said, "You've changed, Hank. How so? You used to play guitar to hold yourself together. Now you play it to let something out." He thought about that. "I think I'm finally singing for someone other than myself," he said. "And maybe for the ones who didn't get to finish their song." She smiled. "Then play something for all of us." He did. It wasn't a loud tune or a flashy one, just a slow rolling melody full of warmth and promise. A lullaby for the living, a tribute to the gone, a song stitched from second chances. As the final chord faded into the night, Rachel whispered, "We stayed, didn't we?" And Hank nodded. We did. In the distance, a breeze rustled the trees. In the cabin, a sketchbook lay open on the table, and overhead the stars didn't just twinkle. They listened, and that was the story of a single dad who collapsed in the snow but stood again because of a whisper and a love that never had a name. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Whether it's a quiet town you call home or a faraway city, we're truly grateful to be spending this time with you. If you enjoy gentle human stories that inspire and heal, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the ones yet to come. We'll be right here, telling the beautiful parts of life, one story at a time. Thank you truly for listening. Wishing you peace, warmth, and a little light wherever you are in the world.